I'm always amused when the discussion, whether it's sports, politics, or the arts, comes around to the discussion of who is the greatest? What is the greatest? Because our own perspective, even though we can see back millions of years towards the creation of the universe and the great drama of the cosmos that is going all around us, we tend to focus on only the last couple years. For instance, one of the few people that might have had the claim to be one of the greatest of all times, the great Muhammad Ali, who would always say, "I am the greatest." We have records of boxers who competed thousands of years ago, who were champions across decades, and we can make a claim they might be the greatest of all time. And certainly when we're discussing who the greatest quarterback of all time is and why he's not Tom Brady, no matter what you say, we're only dealing with a perspective of a few decades, not going back because the sport hasn't been around that long. Talking about the greatest or the worst president, nobody ever talks about whether it's Millard Fillmore or Benjamin Harrison or some other people because it's not real to us. We're only talking about really right now. But when the scholar came up and asked Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? Because he was so impressed by the answers Jesus was giving, this was a debate that had been going on hundreds of years. These laws had been around for hundreds of years. Not 10, not 20, not 30, not the last 24 minutes. Breaking news that will not be significant another 24 minutes from now. Now, there's a lot of laws in the scriptures, and according to the biblical scholars of Jesus' day, counting up in the first 5 books of the Bible, they determined that there were 613 different laws. 613. We might count and get a little bit different. You never know. Are these 2 really 1? Is this one really 2? But it's not that significant. The point is there was a lot, and people like to discuss which one is the greatest. One of the great Jewish rabbis of all time, Hillel, who was the teacher of Gamaliel, who was the teacher of the Apostle Paul, was once asked, "Can you recite the entire law of Moses while standing on one leg?" And he said, "Yes." And he stood on one leg and said, "Don't do unto others what you would not have them do unto you," which is kind of like the golden rule, which isn't really one of the commandments, but he was encapsulating all of them. And really, it isn't that hard. We want to make things really complicated. We want to stress over words and phrases. We want to find out how our neighbors are failing. So we grab one of our clobber verses and bang somebody over the head with it and ignore anything that points at us. But in this story, in this version, in the other gospel, sometimes that person is really challenging Jesus and trying to trap him. But in this version, the scholar is impressed and says, "Well, what do you think it is?" And you know the answer. That's what's nice. Everybody knows this one. Jesus actually picks 2. He says the first one is from Deuteronomy. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength." And in the Greek version, it adds, "and your mind." And the second one goes like this: "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." That sounds so simple. I like it, especially because in the Hebrew, the word love is action. It's not how you feel, it's what you do. Show me. And while the phrasing is easy, these are hard. How do you love God when your spouse of over 50 years is taken from you? And even if you've been together 50, 60, or 70 years, it's too soon. Or how do you love God when life doesn't make sense right now? It's not always easy. Oh, we all love God. It's just great. And then some people say, well, I haven't seen God. How do I know what God looks like? And then the other commandment comes into play. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. But of course, the actual verse, it's actually 2 verses, and it talks about how you're not going to go over there and mess with your neighbor or get even with your neighbor. You will not take vengeance upon your neighbor. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. It recognizes neighbors are some of the hardest people to get along with. The people who know us the best and we know the best are impossible. Neither one of these is easy. But thanks to our saints today, we know that it's doable. Not easy, but doable. What is the greatest? Who is the greatest? Let's talk about some real saints. Doris Walter, bless her heart. You know, if I was going to encapsulate her life in 2 words, I would say game on. Game on. Not just because she, we forget. She was a softball player for many years, but she was a doer, You go down to the Galilean home and you do things. The other charities we were mentioned, you do things. And life and love, you're there. She was game, ready to take part. And she did everything with Don. Well, Don, you might not have known this, but every year going down to the Galilean home, everybody would caravan down there, and everybody be in their separate vehicles. And it was fun because when they'd look, you know how most of us sit? Somebody's in the driver's seat, somebody's in the passenger seat. The car's made that way. It's just more comfortable. Not Don and Doris. Don is at the driver's seat. Doris is in the middle, right next to him the whole way. And everybody go, yeah, that's Don and Doris. You cannot get them apart. Even on that 7-hour drive, they would be closer than anybody else was. And Doris did her best every day to live another day during a very long and difficult illness, because Don mattered to her and she mattered to Don. Any other one of us would have said, I have fought the good fight, I have run the good race, I have finished the course, and henceforth is set aside for me the crown of righteousness. She was ready, she'd earned it. But again and again, another day she gave to Don. And Don gave another day to her, caring for her, because during that long and difficult illness, she did not give up until there was literally nothing left. And we just bless her for the example. And we're grateful to see that you can live that life of service and faithfulness and do it well. Game on. Juanita. Kind, welcoming, loving. Her world was more than just a little circle. It included the whole universe, plants, music, the music of the spheres and the whole universe, service, commitment to peace, the things that, now we see through a glass darkly, as it says in 1 Corinthians, but then we shall see face to face. The universe is not yet fully revealed to us, and yet she and Carlisle showed us that we could live that life of service and commitment to things that we could not see clearly, and we saw it clearly through them. Everybody's end game is a little different. But when Juanita began to lose what many of us would call memory, in a way she became more herself than ever. She was in the memory unit there at Greencroft. But for her, it was a fine place. She was at Camp Mac, the place where God and nature and love and friends come together. And she was part of a camp and doing puzzles or working on crafts and things, and glad to see you when you came in. Glad that you came by. Didn't matter if she knew who you were or not. She would welcome you as she did all her life. Let you talk, and she would talk about things. And Carlisle wasn't gone. He was at home, she was at camp. They'd be back together soon. You always had the sense that parting at which we rightfully feel so much pain and suffering is very temporary, and that we can handle it. She was like a beacon of light in a world in which there's so much darkness and strife and suffering and division. You could walk out of your car, go into that unit, and suddenly, because of her love, because of who she is, be transformed. And it was a blessing. It was a blessing that God gave her the grace to remind us of what real life is all about. Charmaine, I think of the words, the peaceable kingdom. You know, the idea that we're all connected. Humans, animals, plants, earth and sky. You know, a pastor's wife, a bus driver, a mom, so many different things in her life that were celebrated at that wonderful memorial service at Becky and Paris's. And I want you to know, by the way, that Arden will be with us in this because he gets recordings of every single worship service. So your presence here today and your devotion will be clear to him when he gets the CD. She demonstrated that life sometimes shows reversals of roles, and we have to have the grace to accept it. You know, Arden suffered from a disabling condition, and she made it possible for him to stay independent as a caregiver. And then he became the caregiver, and she became the care receiver. Like any good relationship, sparks could fly sometimes because you have very strong personalities and strong people. The lion shall lie down with the lamb. And sometimes we're the lion, sometimes we're the lamb, but that's part of the peaceable kingdom. We will all be together and be one. She was tough as nails and gentle as a summer's rain. And personally, the first time Jenny and I met her, she said, I know it's rough being a pastor's family. Anytime you need to get away, you just come and stay with us. Nobody has to know you're here. And that offer of sanctuary is so important. You know, to know there's a place you can go to and people who understand what you are and what you have been. Lord, please make me a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true, and with thanksgiving I'll be a living sanctuary for you. And then there's Devon. When I came to Indiana in 1990, people said, welcome to Indiana. If you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes. It'll change. And Devon, he could be like Indiana weather too. You know, there are times when something on the news would just get to him and you just see the storms there and everything. Oh man, it was the worst thing. All you had to say is, so what's going on with your grandkids? That's it. The weather changed because the real things brought him joy. Family, friends. Every twist and turn of his life was written in his face. He was what I call a stand-up guy. And he had the skill to make everybody his best friend. To let you know that there was nobody else in the world like you or as important as you. He had a way of just making that circle bigger and bigger and bigger. And you know what else? He would make it good. In his life, as an entrepreneur. He had a great deal of success. But I think one of the things he was proudest of, and I don't mind mentioning this, is that at one point, there was a whole lot of money owed. And it wasn't his fault. But there was a whole lot of money owed, and he made sure it was paid. He made it good. Just like Jesus makes it good for us. We all owe a debt that we don't have to pay. Devon saw to it that every penny was paid. I like that weathered old cloth baseball coat he would wear when he was in the hospital, and he was in the hospital a lot during those last months. It just spoke about a different era, you know, when a skinny kid could get up on the mound and throw a no-hitter against New Paris and end up impressing somebody and getting a wife, you know. I always said that somehow or other the two were linked. And once again, we appreciate the way that he sought to express love even when it was hard to express anything, and the courage and bravery he showed. You know, it says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Our four saints demonstrated both of those qualities, and neither one was easy. But a life of service and devotion to Jesus, to the church, and loving neighbors that weren't always as easy to love as they could have been, and also loving themselves in the process. You can't love your neighbor as yourself unless you love yourself. And to recognize that life is good. These four saints are so important because they show us it can be done. We can do this thing. They are our martyr's mirror, if you will. The stories that we cherish that let us know these things are doable. Game on, as I like to say with Doris. Welcome with Juanita. Sanctuary with Charmaine. Make it good with Devon. But of course, you can say so much more because you know many more stories than I do. Teacher, you have said well, said that student excitedly when Jesus answered. Jesus said it well. They lived it well. Let us receive it well. Mark the words of Jesus in the Gospel of Mark. Mark his words. Let's do this thing.